I found her at his house. That house, hidden in the streets of Chicago, far from any eyes that could reveal them. I hadn't been invited, but I knew exactly where she would be that night. Her lies were no longer enough to hide the obvious. They thought they could trick me, leave me in the dark forever. But at that moment, when I walked through the door and saw her back, smiling in a way she hadn't done to me in months, everything fell apart. She hadn't seen me yet. The party music drowned out my footsteps, the disguised whispers, the complicit glances. My heart beat faster, my breathing became heavy. It was her, the woman I loved, the woman I shared my life with, and now, she was here, in the arms of another man. The seconds before his reaction were eternal. In an instant, the entire scenario of my married life shattered before my eyes. Trust, complicity, family. Nothing else mattered. All that was left was the raw truth. She turned around, and the shock on her face was clear. She didn't expect to see me there, not like that. For a moment, I thought she would regret it, run to me and beg for forgiveness. But what I saw was different. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, as if she were the victim in that situation, as if the pain was more present in her than in me. And then came the phrase that still echoes in my mind to this day, "This is not what it seems." I laughed. A bitter, uncontrolled laugh. "Isn't it what it seems?" My voice was serious, full of desperate irony. I had seen everything. His hands around her waist, the looks of desire, the way she let herself be carried away, as if that was the place she always wanted to be. No, there was nothing left to hide. The betrayal was written in her eyes, in his eyes, and in every detail of that room. But then, like a knife cutting through the air, she said, "You were never there. You never gave me what I needed." I didn't understand right away, shock mixing with despair. "What do you mean I wasn't there?" All this time, all the attempts to save what we had, and now I was to blame. The party continued around, as if nothing had happened. But there, at the center of my crumbling world, were the three of us, me, her, and him. And I realized that the deepest wounds are those that come from where you least expect them. The ground seemed to open up beneath my feet, and the only thing I could think was, how did we get here? She kept talking, her words hitting me like invisible blows. "You walked away, left me alone, cold. There was nothing between us anymore. Not the way it was before." I watched her, trying to understand every word, but at the same time, it was as if I were outside my own body, seeing everything from afar, like a stranger. She tried to justify the unjustifiable, painting betrayal as a consequence, not a choice. And in the end, I was to blame. "You did it," she repeated. "You lost me before you even knew you had me." Her words cut deeper than anything else. The lover beside her said nothing, just watched, as if he knew that that moment was entirely ours, that he had no place there, despite being the reason for everything. What should I do? Leave? Confront them? Emotions were mixed, anger, sadness, humiliation, but, above all, a sense of irreparable loss. That woman, who I thought I knew, was now looking at me as if I were the stranger. "Are you leaving now?" she asked, her voice low, almost challenging. What did she want from me? That I would simply disappear, that I would accept my defeat without a fight? Everything inside me screamed that I couldn't leave things like this. But what if she was right? What if I really was to blame for all this? The silence between us grew, heavy, suffocating. The answer seemed obvious, but I couldn't find the words. What would I say to her? That it was her fault. That she had destroyed our lives. Or that, perhaps, on some level, I had lost her long before I realized. The party lights danced around us, the laughter of the other guests echoing through the room as if we were in a parallel universe, where betrayal and pain were just an insignificant detail. But for me, that was everything. My life, my marriage, my world. Everything was falling apart, and what was left was the question I never thought I would have to ask: why did you do that? She didn't respond right away. And maybe, deep down, I knew I would never have an answer that made sense. Because betrayals never make sense, not when you are on the side of the person who was betrayed. And now, I was in this place. I lost my wife to the man who stood next to her, but more than that, I realized that I had already lost her long before that night. But why was she so calm, so sure that it was my fault? I was ready to hear his answer, ready to discover how far this betrayal had taken root. There was something more, something she hadn't said yet, and for some reason I knew this revelation would change everything. Now, the only thing left was to find out, what was she still hiding from me? The room was softly lit by street lights. The windows were large, allowing reflections from the wet asphalt to create a chaotic pattern on the living room floor. Matthew he sat on the dark brown leather couch, his elbows resting on his legs, his hands covering his face while his head hung low. He couldn't understand at what point everything had changed. The air in the house, once warm and welcoming, now seemed thick, filled with a tension that he couldn't describe, but that oppressed him with every passing second. Sarah, his wife, was in the kitchen. He heard her moving around, opening and closing cupboards, preparing something he knew he wouldn't eat. Over the past few weeks, dinners had become awkward silences interrupted only by the clanking of cutlery. Their relationship, which had once been marked by laughter, long conversations and nights of affection, now seemed like a well-rehearsed choreography, where everyone knew their place, but the passion had evaporated. Matthew tried to remember when things had started to change. The work? The pressure of routine? Perhaps. He knew he worked too much. The late nights piled up, and when I was finally home, it was as if I were away. But he justified himself by telling himself that he did it for them, for the comfortable life he had built. The large apartment, the car in the garage, the trips they planned but never took. Everything they ever dreamed of was there, in their hands. But somehow that didn't seem like enough anymore. Sarah had been the light of Matthew's life for many years. They met at university, both young and full of dreams. She studied arts, while he dedicated himself to administration. They were from different worlds, but that was exactly what attracted them to each other. Sarah was vibrant, creative, with a free spirit that contrasted with Matthew's seriousness. Together, they balanced each other. He gave structure to her life, while she brought color and lightness to his life. In the early years, they were inseparable, and all the differences that could separate them only brought them closer. But now, watching her from afar, Matthew saw a woman who seemed like a stranger. Sarah was still beautiful, with her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, her delicate face marked by expressive eyes. But there was a distance in her gaze that he couldn't cross. When he approached her, he felt as if he were miles away, as if something invisible separated them. Sarah also felt trapped. Looking at the kitchen counter, he saw the coffee stains that needed cleaning and wondered if this was what life had become. A sequence of small tasks and commitments that, deep down, meant nothing. She loved Matthew, or at least she believed she still loved him. But that love had changed. What was once a blazing fire was now just a low flame, struggling to survive amidst so many commitments and responsibilities. In the first years of her marriage, Sarah had dedicated herself completely to her career as an artist. Her exhibitions were gaining prominence, her name was circulating in galleries, and she seemed to be on the verge of something great. Matthew has always supported her, buying materials, sponsoring events, proud of her every achievement. But, over time, Sarah moved away from her art. The pressures of maintaining the house, of being a perfect wife, of dealing with the weight of expectations. All of this was silencing the creativity that used to flow so easily. She didn't blame Matthew. He was always a good man, caring in his own way. But the connection between them had weakened, and with that, Sarah felt lonelier than she had ever felt. She tried to fill the void with routine activities, last-minute trips to see friends, hobbies that didn't satisfy her. But nothing seemed to work. And she, who was once full of life and color, now felt like a shadow of who she used to be. There were nights when Matthew tried to get closer, suggesting they go out to dinner or planning little surprises, but Sarah always found an excuse. She knew he was trying hard, but something inside her prevented her from accepting those attempts. She felt uncomfortable in his presence, as if his mere existence was a constant reminder of what life had become, an invisible prison, without bars, but equally suffocating. And then there were the silences. Long silences that stretched for hours, days. Before, they were able to talk about everything, from the most banal details of the day to deep conversations about the future, about dreams. Now, any word exchanged between them seemed forced, as if they were speaking out of obligation rather than a desire to communicate. It was easier to remain silent than to face what was really happening. One night, while they were both watching a random program on TV, Matthew looked at Sarah and felt a tightness in his chest. He still loved her, he was sure of that. But she no longer looked like the same person. Or maybe it was he who had changed. What had they become? When was the last time you were truly happy? Sarah, in turn, avoided Matthew's gaze. Not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't bear to see the expectation in his eyes, the hope that everything could go back to the way it was before. She knew she couldn't offer him that, not anymore. And that guilt slowly ate away at her. During the day, she occupied herself with anything that could distract her, new courses, meetings with friends, even short trips alone. But at night, when everything was quiet, emptiness surrounded her, and she knew that something inside her had changed forever. They were together, but at the same time, completely alone. What started as a perfect partnership had turned into a forced coexistence, where both pretended that everything was fine while the gulf between them grew every day. It wasn't what Matthew envisioned for his life, and it definitely wasn't what Sarah wanted for herself. What they both didn't yet know was that the abyss that separated them held secrets and wounds much deeper than anyone could imagine. And soon, the truth would come to light, exposing not only the betrayal itself, but the reasons that led them to that point. The days passed slowly, and the distance between Matthew and Sarah only deepened. He knew something was wrong, but even in the most tense moments, he never imagined it could be something so serious. Instead, he blamed himself. He believed that his emotional absence and the tiredness of the years were suffocating the marriage. He tried, even if discreetly, to repair the damage he thought he had caused. He spent more time at home, tried to talk, but each attempt seemed to only push them further into the abyss. Sarah, on the other hand, was increasingly distant. The space between them, invisible but painful, grew with each interaction. Matthew's gaze, always filled with silent questions, made her uneasy. She tried hard to keep up appearances, to remain the wife he knew, but something inside her had already changed. And now, she couldn't pretend anymore. Over the past few months, Sarah had found herself involved in something she had never imagined. An unexpected invitation to an exhibition, an old friendship that had suddenly resurfaced. He, the lover, was a man she knew well. Someone who had been part of his past, a comforting presence in the midst of his emotional crisis. At first it was just an escape, something without intention. But over time, the relationship deepened, and Sarah found herself involved in a way she could no longer control. Sarah's departures became more frequent. Occasionally she would mention a friend, a work event, but Matthew would notice the details that didn't make sense. The excuse of a meeting that ran late or a weekend trip with a friend whose stories were inconsistent. He wanted to trust her, he always had. However, the feeling that something was being hidden was impossible to ignore. One night, Matthew decided to take action. After yet another empty excuse, where Sarah claimed she was going to an art event with colleagues, he discreetly followed her. His heart pounded as he drove, trying to ignore the growing pain in his chest. He wanted to be wrong, he wanted it to be just paranoia resulting from his own insecurity. But when he saw her car parked on a side street, certainty came like a punch. He parked a little further away and walked slowly. The building seemed inconspicuous, with nothing special except for the faint glow of lights coming from a window on the second floor. He knew it was there. The sight of Sarah smiling outside the door, waiting for someone, shattered any last hope he still held. The lover appeared next, and Matthew recognized the face immediately. It was someone he had seen before, someone close enough to never arouse suspicion. Matthew felt his world collapse when he saw them together. He watched the two disappear through the door, and what followed was a deafening silence. The emptiness inside him was absolute, as if everything he knew and loved had been ripped away in a single blow. Every step he took toward the building felt heavier, as if the ground was about to give way beneath his feet. He hesitated for a moment in front of the door, the muffled sound of voices and music escaping through the cracks. He walked up the stairs slowly, his hands shaking and his heart racing. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, but the door in front of him was slightly open, inviting him to enter. He gently pushed the door open and found the room full of people. The sound of music and laughter filled the room, but their eyes were fixed on a single point. In the center of the room, Sarah was there. The dress she wore was different from the one she usually wore when she went out with him. Her hair was done in a way he knew she never did for him. And, next to her, her lover. They spoke in whispers, too intimate, too close. And then, in the middle of exchanging glances, their bodies leaned towards each other, and the kiss happened. Matthew didn't know if what hit him first was anger or despair. He froze for a second, unable to process what he saw. The touch of her lips on another man, the way she seemed so surrendered, as if this was what she always wanted. That image destroyed him. Time seemed to slow down as he tried to find an explanation, a reason for what was happening. The memories of all the years together flashed through her mind, the youth, the promises, the love that once seemed unwavering. And now, everything was falling apart, before his eyes, in the most brutal way possible. The truth was there, naked and raw, and he could no longer run away from it. When Sarah finally saw him, shock washed over her face. She froze, and the entire room seemed to stop for a moment. Matthew stood in the doorway, and the world around them disappeared. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. He didn't need to hear it. The betrayal was already exposed, the pain was already there. Without saying a word, Matthew turned and left. Matthew left the house hurriedly, his heart racing as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. His mind was in chaos, a mixture of anger, sadness and a deep sense of betrayal. He crossed the street almost without realizing it, his eyes fixed on the ground, trying to understand how Sarah, the woman he loved for so many years, could have become so deeply involved with another man. The pain of seeing her in another's arms was unbearable, but there was something more. Something that was hidden behind that betrayal. What else was hidden? It was a question that had been gnawing at him since he began to suspect it. Matthew got into the car, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, and he sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard. Her mind returned to the exact moment she saw him. The shock in her eyes was genuine, but there was no regret, no plea for forgiveness. She looked at him as if everything was beyond her control, as if it were his fault. Without thinking, Matthew started the car and started driving. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't go home. The house now felt like a tomb, a place where her dreams and promises had died. He wandered through unfamiliar streets, aimlessly, until the car, almost as if it had a life of its own, took him to the park where he and Sarah used to walk in the first years of their marriage. Memories flooded his mind as he parked, every smile, every touch, every kind word exchanged there. Everything seemed so far away now, as if it belonged to another life. As he walked through the park, the cold night cutting into his face, Matthew felt the weight of what had yet to be said. He knew there was more, that the betrayal was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. And now, more than ever, he needed answers. I needed to face Sarah, confront her, and hear the truth, no matter how painful it was. Sarah was panicking. After Matthew's devastating look, she knew nothing would be the same. The confrontation he had avoided for so long was now at his doorstep, and there was no longer any way to escape. She left her lover's house hurriedly, ignoring his questions, and headed home with her sweaty hands on the steering wheel. The weight of silence in the car was suffocating. I knew Matthew would want explanations, and worse than that, I knew the guilt he had carried for so long was about to turn into something much darker. She walked into the house, her shoes echoing on the cold living room floor. The house seemed deserted, but she knew Matthew was there, somewhere. He always came back to face situations, he never ran away. The fear in her chest was different from what she felt when thinking about betrayal. The fear now was that he knew everything. Not just about the case, but about what had been hidden for much longer, what she had kept as a dark secret, and which would now, inevitably, come to light. The sound of the door opening brought her out of her thoughts. Matthew entered, his eyes fixed on her, filled with a mixture of pain and controlled fury. For a moment, neither of them said a word. They just stood there, staring at each other, as if they were on opposite sides of a war that they both knew they couldn't win. "Are you going to tell me something?" Matthew's voice was deep, cold. He was on the verge of losing control, but he was fighting to stay calm. "Or are you going to keep pretending that none of this is your fault?" Sarah took a step back, her heart racing. She wanted to speak, wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Everything she had rehearsed in her mind over the last few weeks disappeared, and now she was here, in front of the man she had betrayed, not knowing where to start. "Matthew, She started, but he interrupted her. "Don't make excuses, Sarah. Not today." The anger in his voice was palpable. "I saw it. I saw you in his arms. And now I want to know why. What did I do to deserve this?" She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of guilt tighten in her chest. "It's not that simple," she said, almost in a whisper. "I tried, for so long." "Tried what, Sarah?" Matthew's voice rose a little, his patience running thin. "Try what? Trick me? Betray me while I was here, trying to save what we had?" She felt tears pool in her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. "Not now. I was lost. We grew so far apart. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. You were always distant, always at work. And I felt alone." Matthew laughed, a bitter, pain-filled laugh. "Alone? So you decided to solve this by ruining everything? Betraying me, destroying what we built together? Is that it, Sarah?" "That's not how it happened," she tried to argue, but she knew it was too late. There was no excuse that could erase what he had done. Matthew approached her, his gaze penetrating. "I was always here. I was always by your side. Everything I did was for us. But you preferred to lose yourself in the arms of another man. And now, you want to blame me?" Matthew's words hit Sarah like a blade. She knew he was right in many ways, but what he still didn't know was the deeper reason. And at that moment, she knew she couldn't hide it anymore. "Matthew, she started, but he interrupted her again, this time more aggressively. "Don't give me any more lies, Sarah. Don't give me empty justifications." He took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. "You made your choice. Now I just want to know one thing, was it just once? Or has this been going on for longer?" Sarah lowered her head, unable to look at him. Matthew remained silent, waiting for an answer that, deep down, he already knew what it would be. "It wasn't just once," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It's been like this, for months." Matthew felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. Months. The time when he was trying to reconnect with her, when he was willing to change things, and she was already involved with another man. He took a step back, as if the weight of the revelation had hit him physically. "Months," he repeated in disbelief. "While I was here, you were with him?" All these days, you were cheating on me and pretending everything was fine. Sarah no longer had the strength to respond. She knew that every word that came out of her mouth was like a stab in Matthew's heart, but there was no going back. The silence between them was suffocating, and Matthew finally said, his voice lower, "Why, Sarah? Why did you do that? Why didn't you come to me? We could have worked things out. I loved you. I love you." She looked at him, her eyes full of regret but also something more. Something that Matthew couldn't understand, but that would soon make perfect sense. "I tried, Matthew," she murmured. "I tried to tell you, but you never listened. And now it's too late." Matthew took a deep breath, trying to contain the tears that insisted on emerging. He had never felt so vulnerable, so destroyed inside. Sarah was there, in front of him, the woman he had built a life with, and now, she was almost unrecognizable to him. He took another step towards her, his heart sinking. "What else aren't you telling me, Sarah? I feel like there's something more. Something you're hiding from me." Sarah's gaze changed, turning from guilt to something darker. She knew the moment had come. The moment to reveal what had been buried for so long, the secret that she feared would destroy what little was left of them. "Matthew," she began, her voice trembling, "what I'm going to tell you now, will change everything." He looked at her expectantly, but at the same time with deep fear. "Say it, Sarah. What else do I need to know? What could you hurt me more than you already have?" She took a deep breath and began to speak, each word carrying weight. I blamed you for so long, Matthew. I blamed you for the distance, for the coldness, for everything that happened between us. But the truth is, I was no longer here before he even appeared. I was no longer here, yours, before all this." Matthew frowned, trying to understand. "What do you mean by that, Sarah?" She continued, her voice low, almost a whisper. "The truth is that I lost myself a long time ago. And I blamed you because, it was easier than admitting that, in fact, I was the one who pushed you away. I was the one who stopped loving you." The impact of her words was devastating. Matthew felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. Matthew was silent, trying to process the weight of Sarah's last words. She didn't love him anymore. For a long time, he had been just a shadow, a pale reflection of what they once were. He stared at the woman in front of him, now so far away, trying to find some trace of the person he believed he knew. Her words still echoed in his mind, like a bell ringing repeatedly, painful and relentless. She blamed him, but deep down she had given up on them a long time ago. It was hard to accept, but a part of him always knew. He took a deep breath, not sure what to say. His chest hurt with the mixture of anger, hurt and an almost suffocating sadness. Sarah's revelation wasn't just about physical betrayal. It was much deeper. Their love, which was once the basis of everything they built, no longer existed. And at that moment, Matthew felt the weight of his helplessness. He couldn't fight for something that had been gone for so long. Sarah, on the other hand, felt exposed, vulnerable. Finally, he had told the truth, but when he saw the expression on Matthew's face, he realized that the pain he felt was much greater than he imagined. She knew there was no going back, that the frankness she feared so much now separated them definitively. It was as if a bridge had been burned between them, leaving only the ashes of what had once been a relationship full of promises and dreams. Matthew looked at the ground for a long moment, trying to find the strength to respond. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were fixed on hers. There was no longer anger in his eyes, just a deep sadness. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Everything we lived through, everything we built, was destroyed by something you decided not to tell me?" Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to find the right words to ease the pain she saw on his face, but she knew there was nothing she could say to change what she felt. The silence that followed was crushing. They were both there, together, but the distance between them was insurmountable. "I didn't know how to tell you, Matthew," she said finally. "I got lost along the way. I tried, but I couldn't. By the time I realized it, it was too late." He took a step back, as if her words had hit him physically. The pain in his chest only increased. Matthew always imagined that the love between them, even worn out, could still be saved. That with effort, with patience, they could find each other again. But at that moment, he realized he was fighting alone for something that was already over for her. "And now?" he asked, with a calm that surprised him. "What do you want me to do, Sarah? Blame me for not seeing this sooner? Blame me for being an idiot who believed we could get through anything?" She didn't respond immediately. "I knew there was no answer to that. There was no going back in time, there was no repairing the damage that had already been done. They were both trapped in a situation they could not escape." Matthew walked away, feeling the weight of every word spoken so far. The silence between them was a reflection of the emotional distance that had existed for some time. He knew he couldn't force her to come back, couldn't fix something that was broken beyond repair. "I don't want any more excuses," he said, his voice firm but full of tiredness. "I don't want to hear any more how alone you felt or how I failed you. It all seems so small now, in light of what happened. The truth is, we both failed, but you chose to punish me for it." Sarah's look was one of pure guilt. Matthew's words were harsh, but there was no way she could argue with them. She knew that, at some point, she had chosen to give up, without even realizing it. He had allowed everything to fall apart without a fight. "You're right," she admitted finally, with tears in her eyes. "I punished you. I walked away when I should have spoken up. I betrayed you in so many ways, and now none of this can be fixed." Matthew felt an emptiness take over his heart. It was strange how love and pain could coexist in such a brutal way. He still loved her, despite everything. But that love was now tainted by a deep, irreparable sadness. What they had no longer existed, and accepting that was an almost unbearable burden. The moral dilemma before him was suffocating. Part of Matthew wanted to fight, wanted to try to understand, wanted to forgive. But another part knew that Sarah's betrayal, both physical and emotional, was a point of no return. How could he move forward knowing he had been betrayed in every way possible? How could he continue to be by her side knowing that she had already given up on loving him long before any infidelity? Silence reigned between them again, a silence filled with everything that was never said. Sarah, head down, waited for a decision she didn't have the courage to make. And Matthew, still in shock, knew that whatever choice he made in that moment would change their lives forever. He turned around, slowly walking towards the door, without looking back. He didn't know what to do or what to think. "The only thing I knew was that after that night, nothing would be the same." The decision he needed to make still weighed heavily on his heart, but for now, he just needed distance. Matthew drove for hours that night. The silence inside the car was disturbing, and the headlights illuminated the path in front of him, but his mind was lost in a whirlwind of thoughts. The dilemma of forgiving or abandoning Sarah consumed him, but the betrayal was a weight he didn't know how to carry. He always imagined that, in time, the love between them would survive any storm. But now, he realized that it wasn't just a case of a mistake or an emotional deviation. It was a deep break, a scar he could never ignore. The next morning, Matthew made his decision. When he returned home, he found it empty. Sarah had left, leaving a letter on the dining table, explaining that she was going away for a few days to give him space. He knew she wanted to avoid confrontation, but at that moment, all he felt was relief. He needed this distance to see the situation clearly. Without delay, Matthew began to pack his things. He knew there was no going back. The pain, the betrayal, everything was too unbearable to repair. With his bags packed, he left the house he once called home, without looking back. There was nothing left there for him. The person he thought he loved no longer existed, and what was left between them was just emptiness. The days that followed were lonely for Matthew, but also reflective. He rented a small temporary apartment and began to reorganize his life. Divorce, although painful, was inevitable. He had already started the legal process, without major discussions or disputes. He just wanted to move on, rebuild his life without carrying the weight of the past. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself completely alone. The lover, who once seemed like an escape from his problems, was no longer interested. He had disappeared from her life the moment she found out that Matthew had discovered the affair. Sarah, who once saw herself as a strong and independent woman, now felt lost, aimless. Without Matthew, the life she knew had fallen apart. She tried to get back on her feet, but guilt haunted her, and loneliness weighed more heavily than she expected. Months passed, and Sarah tried in vain to contact Matthew. She knew there was no forgiveness, but she still wanted a chance to talk, to at least try to end it in a way that wasn't so cold. Matthew, however, had cut all bridges. Every call, every message, every attempt at rapprochement was ignored. For him, this story was over. The love they had, or what was left of it, was buried along with the betrayal. In the end, Matthew found the peace he had been searching for. He rebuilt his life away from the ghosts of the past. The divorce was made official without any major battles, and he moved on, stronger and more aware of himself. Little by little, he learned to forgive himself too. The guilt I carried for not noticing the signs that the marriage was falling apart was replaced by a calm acceptance that some things are simply not meant to last. Love, even when true, can be fragile. For Sarah, life was not so generous. She never managed to overcome the weight of her choices. The guilt over the betrayal and the end of her marriage gnawed at her. The memories of the past, of who she was with Matthew, and of what she lost, haunted her daily. Her lover had moved on with his life without looking back, and she, without Matthew's support, had sunk into regrets. He tried to resume his artistic career, but each brushstroke seemed like a memory of what once was, and would never be again. Life took its course for both, but in opposite directions. Matthew, now a more mature man, realized that the pain, however devastating, was temporary. He started attending support groups, made new friends, and, over time, opened his heart to new possibilities. Eventually, he found love again, but this time with someone who respected and valued him, building a relationship based on honesty and commitment. Sarah, on the other hand, never found redemption. His attempts to reconnect with the past were in vain. She continued to live a lonely life, marked by sadness and regret. Her days were filled with memories of what could have been, if she had made different choices, if she had fought alongside Matthew instead of against him. In the end, all that was left was the echo of the silence she had created. This is the story of Matthew and Sarah, of a love that was once immense, but that succumbed to human failures and wrong choices. A story that shows that there is not always a way back, and that forgiveness is often more difficult to grant when the betrayed is one's own heart. If you've made it this far, tell us, what did you think of this story? Your opinion is very important. Leave your comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, we explore the deepest feelings, pains and overcomings that we often hide. And remember, the channel does not support any type of betrayal. Betrayal leaves marks that cannot always be erased. Until next time.